my next question is this. When you were coming up, do you have an important insight or a story or moment as you were coming up into the journey that you've been on into leadership? Can you tell me something that has sort of stuck with you, something that has sort of taught you that moment to become a leader? So for me, I'll just say as an example, of that moment backstage, I realized that I can't just sort of wait my turn to be like, okay, great, well, can you talk to me now? Instead, I realized I had to make the space for myself.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, in a world that doesn't always want to change, you have to make that space for yourself and really start that change. So that was my lesson. Was there any lesson or story as you were coming up that any one of you want to share?
I'll take one. I mean, this is deep, so when and where I enter, one of our foremothers said that, but I'm thinking about a quote from the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss when he said that the struggle is forever, so we are forever in the struggle. And that's how I want to overlay what it is like to be a Black woman in power. And the reason why I put that in air quotes is because it doesn't matter how many fancy titles and degrees you get, you always bump up against that moment. And Sha, I can relate to you, not so much that somebody put a glass or a towel in my hand, but when I'm on the trail, not even when I'm on the trail, there have been moments, and Karundi, she knows this deeply, and so does the councilwoman here, that we would be in rooms and my colleagues, especially my white male colleagues, but not exclusively, they would be councilman, because I served on Cleveland City Council too, and I would be Nina. Or in the Senate, it would be senator to them, and I would be Nina. Or moments where I'm with folks, even with Senator Sanders, and people think I'm the assistant, because I'm the Black woman. So for me, it is important for all of us, whether we're Black or brown or white or the swirl in between, to recognize that we have been socialized in a society that has already deemed that if you are Black, you got to be the servant. And not the kind of servant that says that he or she who is greatest among you should be the servant, but the kind of domestic kind of hold people's bags and glasses and kind of servant. So we all have to deconstruct our construction, because it's not just about whether you're white or not in America. It is, if you have been socialized in America, your natural instinct is always to see Black and brown people as the other kind of servant. And so, Zora Neale Hurston had a passage where she talks about the world bumping up against you. And baby, we got to always be willing to bump it back at all times. So, yeah, I mean, the journey has been hard, but it has been worth it. And there are many stories that I'm sure all of us can tell. I'm going to share one. It still gets to me to this day, and I got many. Well, two. So anyway, first name Senator, last name Turner is the moral to that story. And I'm honorable when and where I enter. And I'm doing that, not just because I earned this title, but also for my foremothers and forefathers who were grown-ass people who were still called boy and girl. For my grandmother who told stories about being called a girl as a grown-ass woman. For the generation even before her, when Black folks couldn't look white people in the eye, or they had to get off the sidewalk. Oh yeah, first name Senator, last name Turner, because I earned that title. I earned that title. All of my ancestors who were ever disrespected in the future generations of Black and brown people. So yeah, first name Senator, last name Turner. But I remember at Karundi, I ain't gonna name this senator, but we were in the criminal justice, one of those damn committees, and I was getting the best of the chairman, and he was so mad because he had sister knows Robert Rules. I know a little something. I'm not an attorney, but I just play one on TV. And he was so mad that he told me to shut up in committee. What you not gonna do? What you not gonna do? In my mind, I was cussing up a storm in my head. So I said, either I'm gonna go there, Brother Maurice, or I'm gonna handle this. And I was calling on Black Jesus in my mind. And thinking about my grandmother who said, act like you got some sense in public. And I said, to at least put some respect on my name and just say, Senator, shut up. Put some respect on that. And so that's one story. Then my other quick story, and I will jive you not. When I endorsed Senator Bernie Sanders, I'll never forget, the president, help me Black Jesus. I had an event that was about to happen in my city for Planned Parenthood. I remember the state president of Planned Parenthood calling me, and she said, Senator, my phone is ringing off the hook. I just got 50 calls saying you about to endorse Senator Bernie Sanders. I said, it's true. She said, you know we got that event tomorrow. I said, yes, in the city of Cleveland. She said, I'm gonna do everything I can to protect you. I said, protect who? From what? Right. What the heck? You know, I did have a WTF moment. I'm gonna do everything I can to protect you. And as Cedric the Entertainer said in one of his famous skits, I wish a mofo would. I was having that kind of moment. So the next day I get there and I got all these stares from all these progressive white women, progressive folks in Planned Parenthood in the city of Cleveland. And I'll never forget, this white woman walked up to me. She's a little shorter than me, so I won't exaggerate and say she had a finger in my face. But she had her finger too close to my face. And she began to chastise me for the decision that I made. And then she went on to say, after all we've done for you, I'm reliving the moment right there. It was a whole animated conversation, but she ended it with, after all we've done for you. And in my mind, for that brief moment, I had a flashback. And these progressive folks, I ain't talking about Republicans or people who pretend,
they're the worst kind.
saying to me, black girl, you done went too far, because you're not thinking in ways that we told you to think after all we've done for you. So first of all, what the hell have you done for me? That's number one. And number two, let me tell you one damn thing, and this is what I said. I am not on the plantation. My ancestors worked too hard for me to be a free-thinking black woman in America. Come on, man. But I'm serious. Don't that get to you?
Oh, I'm uncomfortable in my seat right now. I'm ready to go start a war right now. That's crazy.
You know, it's real though. I'm all kind of in my feels right now because I do remember that day in committee, and I remember being so angry. And as Senator Turner said, we could all share many stories. I had my coffee moment. And I have had you're the intern, when I was the director of government affairs for the governor of Ohio.
Yes.
And I went into a meeting with him, and they thought I was the intern. I need to go get the copy, the photocopy. But on a different angle, in fact. Okay, no problem at all. But just a sort of a different angle on that story that Senator Turner was telling, my moment came when, as the director of government affairs and political director for the governor of the state of Ohio, I convened a meeting of all the heads of all the big black churches in Cleveland.
Yes.
And I walked into a room of all elder statesmen, Senator Turner, you can relate, and the sort of ring kissing that you also have to do in order for you to be able to execute on a plan. And they were my moment of our people too, because we have those moments where our own people don't have you. And there was a moment where I walked into the room and all the heads, you know how pastors and ministers are, right? They all sat down, and I walked into the room and I sat at the head of the table, and they were wondering why I was there, and they were expecting someone else to be convening the meeting. And they asked me, so is the governor going to be here? And I said, no, this is my meeting. And so for me, that moment of when I stepped into my leadership and found my voice is when I had to explain to them why I was the one who needed to hold that meeting with them, and why I was speaking for the governor, and that they didn't need to call him and check what I was saying. That I was there because it was my meeting to be held. And it was one of those moments of power, that moment that I stepped into my power, convened them, had a conversation, had a 2-hour meeting, and walked out with them thanking me, shaking my hand, and asking me how they can support the governor. So for me, it was like Senator, I mean, we can all have the stories of the folks that, are our white sisters or all of that. But even within our communities, there's this gender thing that happened as well. And that was a very gendered moment. And you know, and it was all men in the room, all older men in the room. So there was a gender thing, and there was like, you're a young Black woman. There was a generational thing as well. Why are you here, and how are you, you know, bold? You're bold enough to convene this meeting, and then you're gonna walk into the room and sit at the head of the table? Yes, I am.
Come on.
So, I probably have 100 stories.
A million. Yeah,
But-
so many.
One of the things that I think was useful for me is when I chose to take on this particular position, I had to consider what my intervention was, right? And we all have titles, right? But to me, Black leadership or brown leadership or leadership of color is not meaningful if all we do is take on the title, function, and roles of the previous leadership. And we're just stewards of sort of liberal diversity. And I came here to destroy white supremacy. That's why I was put on this planet, right? Which means, sure, I'll take the title, but it's my duty to transform the function and the role. Right? It's actually our duty when we're put into these positions to actually, like, when we're finally able to set the table, it might be our role to flip the table over, right? Right? And so, to me, you have to be armed with knowing what your intervention is and what your vision is, right? Because if you're just seeking title and empty positions of leadership, then what are we actually doing? We have like 8, maybe 9 decades on this planet. What are we actually doing, right? And so, you know, for me, you know, like again, one of the I love. So I show up younger than I am, and whenever I say my title, like I see how it shifts people's relation to me in the room. But I mean, ultimately, as somebody who grew up in grassroots organizing, like, and now I interact with, you know, I interact with presidential candidates and people like that. The people to this day who are the most important people to me are the grassroots volunteers, are the members, are the people, because organizing is an organic sort of outgrowth of people seeking freedom, right? The professionalization of organizing has brought us to this place. One of the reasons why we're experiencing this Trump presidency is because the organizing has been corporately captured, right? And so we need to liberate organizing. It's our duty to do that, which means flipping the power dynamic and making sure that the person at the center, the most important person, is that grassroots volunteer. Most organizers do not get paid. So if you have this rarefied position to actually be paid for this work, then you need to take on the responsibility for that, to make sure that you democratize these spaces so that the grassroots organizers that will liberate us, not the paid organizers, have the room and the space to do that. And so, again, Black leaders, you know, there's a difference between Black leaders and leading Blacks, right? And so leadership is not something that you ordain for yourself. Leadership is given to you by the people. And it's a heavy responsibility that you earn and re-earn every single day, right? And so, to me, one of the interventions I wanted to make in a moment of celebrity and in a moment of spectacle and in a moment of social media followers, right? None of that makes you a leader, right? What determines whether or not you're a leader are the people who you avail to their own power, are the grassroots leaders that you help organize, right? That's what determines whether or not you're a leader. And so, to me, part of my public leadership is demonstrating a different type of leadership, a servant leadership, a leadership that's committed to the grassroots. I think it's our duty when we take these roles to transform it, to democratize it, and fundamentally, like, listen, we're in these roles for a lot of reasons. And not all of them are great, honestly, right? We're in a moment of crisis. Whenever we're in a moment of crisis, this country historically has looked for Black folks to pull us out of crisis, right? So we're in this moment of crisis. What is our obligation? So that's something that I think about every single day. What is your intervention? And that's what drives me.
Absolutely. So I made the mistake of following all of y'all, which I will never do again. I feel like I've had so many times in my journey as a Black woman where I've been challenged, and I think Nina's right. I think on both sides, right? Like people will test you. I'm a pretty kind person. They see your kindness for weakness until you have to show them differently, which I don't like to do because I'm a heart, soul, love person. As Nina knows, I share love, and I believe that love is the most powerful energy in the universe, as my girl India Irie said. When I was from law school to being a lawyer, to being a councilwoman, to being in this leadership, people will always test you. And my story of being confused, I was an established lawyer and was trying a case, and we were doing a case together, and I went up to Columbus, and we were doing a deposition, and I had my briefcase, and I was ready with all my exhibits, and they put me in a room, and I was waiting, and I'm like, where is everyone? And the woman who was setting up the room, the assistant who was setting up the room, comes in, and she goes, oh my God. I said, why aren't we starting? She said, we got a little issue, we got more than one court reporter, and we're trying to figure out what to do. I said, fine, I'll be ready to start setting my stuff up, and she goes, okay, great, we're great now. I don't know why that second court reporter came. We sent her away. Are you ready to get started? I said, ma'am, I am the lawyer. They literally sent the woman who came and said she was the court reporter away because they assumed that I was that person. I got a deep respect for court reporters. God bless them, all the folks who make the work that we do better. But the idea that they wouldn't even stop to think and come to me and say, when the actual court reporter say, are you the lawyer? Sent the woman away, we had to find another. I said, wow. Those moments are moments where I feel like you really do start to, I think, fire up in a way. I'm not one for form or fashion or title or any of that. But the idea that you would just naturally assume. Now my story is that I grew up in the projects, first in my family to go to college, mentally ill mother, drug addicted father. All I ever wanted to do was change the world. And I decided the way to do that at first was to become a lawyer, was do justice. I saw so much injustice, and to do all of that work, to earn it, to get there, and to be confused for a court reporter when the actual court reporter shows up. So in my journey, there have been so many times like that, and I think the way that I manifest that just in a big way is to never treat anybody like they're less than. Ever. Love the janitor, love the secretary, love them all, treat them with respect, treat them like they are your family. And that is what we've seen. Coming up in the movement and being an African-American woman in Cincinnati, challenging the status quo day in and day out. I was the 5th Black woman in the history of Cincinnati to be a city council person. Imagine that. Cincinnati's over 200 years old. I'm only the 5th Black woman ever. Never had a Black woman mayor ever in the city of Cincinnati. And here I come with my little Black self, opposing stand your ground in Ohio, proposing paid leave and passing paid leave in our city for the first time ever. Here I come with my little Black self, protecting victims of human trafficking. Black, white, transgender babies being trafficked in our city. Ohio's the 5th worst state in the country for human trafficking. And I'm saying what we're not going to do is arrest people who are victims. What we're going to do is find solutions and build solutions and get them what they need. And then this little Black girl wants to be mayor. So you can imagine your story, and I remember you calling me around that whole thing with Bernie, and just, oh my gosh, so much love in that situation, and I was so mad. But imagine this little Black girl who decides she wants to be the first Black woman ever to be mayor of a city. All these people who I had rallied with and worked with, and we had done things and changed laws, and all of a sudden, you can't do that. You know who your opponent is? The people who had stood with me, now running away from me, saying they couldn't support me, they couldn't help me, there was no way I could do this. It is so challenging, and I had a moment like this with Ayanna Presley when and Ayanna and I had worked together as council members and she helped me bring trauma-informed care, violence as a public health issue to Cincinnati. She had shepherded that work, and we worked together to bring that in Cincinnati. And when we went and DFA decided to endorse her race, which was an easy call, frankly, she experienced the same thing. And to be able to sit with her and channel that and say to her, we are not what they say we are. They want us to believe that we're not enough. They want us to believe that we're less than. And what we are is that we are able, we are capable, we can do this, we will lead. And after winning the primary, first Black woman ever to win a primary, beat me incumbent by 11 points. My city doubled down on me. My party stood against me. The National Party stood against me. Removed my voter file without notice. Yes.
The Republicans did that.
No, it was the Democrats who did that to me. Used national resources to support my opponent. We stood regardless. Taking corporate money against me. Private money, secret money against me. And they did win. I did lose that race. But at the end of the day, what we realized was that we had built a movement. We had built a progressive, strong movement. And the next time someone decides to take that seat, it will be better for it. And so I think in this role, I bring that spirit, right? So DFA has a 15-year history. And then this year, what we're doing is really saying, okay, how do we harness that and take that into the future? So we're revamping, we're looking, we're working in partnership with folks. But at the end of the day, we will continue. And I think in this role, I feel so empowered to do it because I am the bottom line for all endorsements for this organization, is that we will take chances and we will endorse people and we will support people who folks throw away, who folks say, and I don't care if the Democrats are opposing them or supporting them, if they are the best candidate, we will support them. And I won't apologize for it. I got one more story. And it's recent. And so, I'm the new DFA CEO, we're making endorsements, we're doing great things, and I made a decision that a certain candidate's representative didn't like. Charlie's in the audience, he's gonna laugh at this. I won't reveal any names, Charlie. So we made a decision to endorse the best candidate in a race. And so that person's representative who used to be a part of the Democratic establishment gave me a call. They didn't like that. And so I said, fine, you have the right. So I didn't ghost her, I just called her back and said, well, what would you like? Well, I'm really offended by the fact that you didn't give my candidate a chance to da-da-da-da-da. I made a decision, your candidate is not a progressive, I will not support them. They don't stand with us on the issues and we will not do it. This person proceeded to try to berate me in a phone call. And I try to be real, you know me, I'm kind of low key in my thing. I can't tell you how many times I said, do you know that I am the CEO of DFA and I bottom line all endorsement decisions? You don't run my organization, you don't tell me what to do. How dare you call me and tell me that I have to give your candidate an endorsement? I don't care who you're connected to. I don't care how big you are in the mainstream. We do this thing differently. We do this differently. You will not tell me what to do. It was so bad, I called my chairman, I said, all right, so let me tell you how this went down. I said, so if somebody called you, he said, I ain't worried about that. He said, I know you handled it. I already handled it. So things like that, and I know you've experienced that, even though, I think you being the first person of color to lead DFA Arshad, this thing where you feel like you can bully me into supporting your candidate.
Yeah.
It's real. It's real. It's real. It's real.
How you feel about it?
I'm good. Are you kidding me? Like I got a front row seat to this. This is great. There's so many lessons here in your stories, in your history, in the perspective that you bring. And in each of these, I see you in your power. So my question is, who's next? What's next? How do we make space? I'm hearing stories about how our community, sometimes our own community, doesn't always support us in the way that we need, and that could be any number of communities, however we want to count them. And then we have to find strength, a well of strength within ourselves. But I am also hearing, especially at the top of this, the community support. They're able to give each other. So my question is, what about the next leader and the next leader? How do we make it so that you aren't the only four? There's obviously many others, but how do we make more of these powerful Black leaders in these powerful progressive organizations? How do we make space for the next? What do you do?
So I'd like to share a story and to answer that question. So I was talking about my background in politics. I've had 10 years in government affairs and policy and all of that stuff. But when the 2010 elections were a defining moment for me in my career in terms of where I thought I was going to go. I was always, as I put it, doing work under the dome, right? Trying to effectuate change through the legislative pathway. And 2010 was incredibly jarring for me in that we lost the race. I mean, we lost everywhere. Also lost really bad in Ohio. And I watched Governor John Kasich come in and basically undid everything we were able to accomplish. So for me, that was the moment where I had to question, where do I want to go next in my career? And I decided it was in the movement building space. Took a job in labor, and I, left the state and went national. And when I went into SCIU, I had all this great experience, but I didn't come from labor. I didn't work in labor. And one of the first things that happened to me is I was embraced by another woman of color in the organization who said, I will mentor you and I will help you navigate the mammoth sort of space that labor is. And I'm going to name her. Her name is Rana Epting, who is the new executive director at and that's why I plugged her here, because she's not here, but I wanted to lift up my sister. But Rana embraced me. We met at SCIU 7.5 years ago, and she said, let's do peer-to-peer mentoring. And that was essential and important, and an example of how we're building the next group of leaders. And so Rana and I had this conversation at coffee, and she said, Karundi, where do you want to see yourself in 5 years? And we had this wonderful conversation, and she said she wanted me to write it down, and she wanted me to be intentional about every opportunities I took within the organization and how I grow within my leadership, but with this 5-year goal in mind. And I wrote down something that looks like my current position as executive director at Repower. I basically said, look, I want to marry the two parts of my brain, movement building space, and I want to do the electoral work, and I want it to come together, and I want to figure out how we do this. And so the beauty of this role for me is the marriage of the perfect role, because it is the marriage of both sides of my brain. And we're also building in leadership in communities of color with this organization, and with this rebrand that we've done over the last 2 years is to be bold and unapologetic that we want to build leadership in communities of color, but specifically around women of color. And so all our trainings and all the work that we do will reflect that. So to go back to the story, so Rana and I have had this relationship for 7 years. We've always been intentional about how we're supporting each other. And here we are, the same year, being named executive directors of major national organizations. And for 7 years, it's been this weaving in and out of supporting each other along our journeys. And now we're both taking on these leadership roles, and we'll continue to support each other. And we're gonna, you're gonna see partnerships like you've never seen before, simply to the fact that we have people of color in these leadership organizations. And so when we think about what we do next is to be intentional about building my organization for the first time in its history. My entire leadership team are women of color, to be clear. Every single one of them. And they all have titles like vice presidents because that's what they deserve. And every staff member in my organization, what I say to them is we're going to reflect the values out in the world. We're going to do that within our organizations. So that looks like peer-to-peer mentorship. That looks like tell me where you want to be in 5 years and make sure we're intentional every day that the work that you do is a building block and a stepping stone to doing that. We're saying make sure the trainings that Repower is doing along with PFA and my friend over here, let's make sure we're intentional about choosing the leaders that we see, that we don't, again, we shared all our stories about people saw us as interns. But let's make sure we're pulling these people forward with us, we're training, we're investing with them, and that we're also building the network of support that Maurice talked about. Maurice was one of the first people who emailed me and said, anything you need, let's get on a call, let's talk about it, tell me what you need to support you in this role. And so that camaraderie is important, and sort of building together and literally finding, I'm mentoring now as well, right? I was mentored peer-to-peer, and don't laugh at that when your colleague comes to you and say, how can I mentor you and how can you support you? That's important. I was sharing with Yvette this morning that my mentor, Yvette Brown in Ohio, who ran for lieutenant governor, who was the first Black woman to be on the Ohio Supreme Court. She is amazing. Whenever I have moments of doubt and fear, I call her. Any major decisions in my personal life or my career, I call her. So that's what it looks like for next.
That's great. Yeah, go for it, man. So a few things. So one of the reasons why I took this position was particularly for this mission, to pipeline, right? All of the work that we do essentially at Working Families Party is just a huge grassroots organizing pipeline from grassroots leader to elected leader and on and on and on. And you see who you see, right? So I inherited an organization where the staff, in a very, very diverse country, the staff was predominantly white. Many of the candidates that we endorsed were the normative electable candidates, right? Which veered to white folks and men and people who have the establishment credentials, right? But you see who you see. So I remember, I came on, I've been hiring people, and I've been building out the team. And somebody was like, it seems like you're exclusively hiring black women. And I'm like, I'm just hiring the most talented people I can find. But if you have white candidates that are appropriate, we'll look at them, right? I've been struggling to find talented white staff. Do you know any white staff who have the appropriate prerequisites? I can't find them. So you see who you see, right? And so it's funny, they're like, can you do that? I was like, nobody in the history of America has asked that question until black people start doing things, right? And so, again, and the other thing is like, we both get to, in WFP, we get to pipeline staff, we also get to pipeline candidates. And so, I don't know if they're in the building, but we're in Philly, so I have to give a shout out to Nicholas O'Rourke and Kendra Brooks, the most amazing, dynamic, independent candidates running for Philly City Council. We get to endorse, those are two folks who the establishment Democrats were in touch with the 10-foot pole, but they're the reason we do politics, right? And so, again, I agree with, you should be mentoring folks and you should have a mentor, right? There's always room for growth, right? And so you should always be identifying people that you are in a consistent, serious mentorship relationship with and be mentoring. I think that's essential. And then, we say pipeline, but to me, that is the work. The work is pipeline. Otherwise, you're hoarding, if you're not pipelining, if you're not creating opportunities, you're hoarding power.
That's right.
Right? So this is not a neutral proposition. If you're not, you need to have a transition plan, right? Otherwise, how different are we than the leadership of the past? If when we find these rarefied positions, we hunker down. One of the ways that people in executive director titles, the way that they hoard powers, ultimately one of our greatest powers is relationship, right? So they like to hoard those relationships, especially relationships to money, right? And so we need to, when we're in these positions, to make sure that we democratize that. So the people on the tiers under us are getting opportunities to build those relationships, to build those skills, so you can transition. I don't want to be in this position for the rest of my life, right? I think another thing is that we're entering a different type of leadership. There was a leadership of the past where you had these folks who stewarded their organizations for decades, right? Listen, that's one of the styles of leadership, among other things, that got us in this position, right? And I know we're all around the choir, but I fly all around I know Sister Turner could tell you this, right? We're within the interior of this country, talking to everyday working class people, it's going to be a effort to defeat the white Christian identity movement, right, that brought Trump into the White House. It's going to be an effort. And so we must do things differently. And one of the ways we have to do things differently is opening up spaces for people's leadership and investing in it, right? It's not a mentorship relationship if you just randomly call people every now and then. It's like, how you doing, girl? That's you hanging out. You invest time and resources into a mentorship relationship, right? And so we have to be very deliberate and very serious. And we have to really analyze all of the old styles of leadership, look at our particular political conditions, and think how we have to reform leadership and leadership development.
Guiding
some time for questions.
So you
yeah?
do, okay, so, I mean, I'm gonna amen what my sisters and brothers did in light of time. I'm gonna amen what they said. True that. True that.
So I think we're in an interesting and amazing place, I think, at DFA. You know, it's an organization that's been around for 15 years. And, you know, the progressive movement has changed over that time in, I think, a lot of ways. And one of the first things that, you know, we haven't had the pleasure of building yet, we're in a kind of a stay steady, and we'll be growing hopefully at the end of this year and making some hopefully really great hires later this year and next year. But what I've been taking our organization through is just an analysis of our first 15 years and talking about how our next 15 years looks different, right? You know, we have an overwhelmingly white membership. How do we change that? How do we diversify our membership to reflect the changing demographics of our country, right? How do we make sure that we have partners that reflect the changing demographic of our country? And how do we sustain this organization, which is so essential for the next 15 years? And so that work has been great. I think part of the thing that we don't talk about as leaders is we don't just sit at tables and fly around the country. We are responsible for sustaining an organization, which means we have to leave it better than we found it. And what Maurice was talking about with Black leadership in particular, this pressure, you know, to make sure that you sometimes get an organization, in our case it wasn't this way, but sometimes you get an organization in a state, and then your obligation is to make sure that you deliver it better than you found it. Some people call it the black tax, I just call it whatever. But the idea that we have to make sure that it is stronger fiscally, that it is fulfilling its mission better than ever, and that it goes into the future stronger. And so really incubating for us, and that's why I've been spending a lot of time with leaders, new progressive leaders, saying, you know, for instance, Karundi, you do training. How can we partner on training? DFA's core is electoral. How do we partner with Working Families Party, Justice Dems, other organizations to make sure when we endorse candidates, we get over the finish line together, right? Because we need strong Black and brown, white progressive leaders across the country. And guess what? We get outmatched and outsized when we don't bring all of our resources together. I got 1.2 million members around the country, but I don't have the kind of grassroots legacy group like you might have, or you might have. How do we feed our members into your work so that our members can support the candidates? I've met with, I don't know, 3 or 4 of your candidates just since I've gotten here, Mo, about how do we bring DFA's power to partner with Working Families Group. We've got a candidate we're trying to get to win for Senate against Susan Collins in Maine right now. Say something appropriate. I'm trying to be good anyway. So meeting with JD, meeting with Indivisible, meeting with my brothers and sisters at Our Rebel. How can we all descend upon Maine and take that seat? So it's all about togetherness and doing the work that we do, and that's the lens for DFA. I think, having been here for a little longer, is we can't continue to do what we've done. But when we started, there were very few organizations in the movement. Now we got a bunch of help. Let's work together and get this thing done, right? Because what they want us to do is to be separate and not work together, and then they can pick us off one at a time. What I saw in my race inspired me to bring that here, because Nina Turner and Jim Dean were on the ground in my seat at the same time.
That's right.
Our Revolution, Move On, and DFA, all in Cincinnati to support a little Black girl who wanted to be the first Black mayor of Cincinnati. That's how we do this work. And so for us, it's this year of really digging in the partnership and leadership and figuring that out. And then as we staff up, as you say, staffing up with people of color so that our organization will shift, because our organization was predominantly white in leadership, although we've always had really, really strong Black and brown people at DFA. But we can always do better. And the idea that as we restaff and as we build up a strong team of brown and Black people who will change the world. And we do that all together.
Amen. Amen.
Well, I've had such a privilege being able to ask 3 questions to such an amazing panel of leaders.